Díomh agus fáilte ar ais. You're all very welcome to another episode of Irish in Toronto. Today I'll be chatting with Michael Doyle. I first came to know Michael when his daughter, Madeleine, was selected as the winner of the inaugural Irish Heritage Awards for her artwork depicting Thomas D'arcy McGee and the expectations of Irish immigrants to Canada. Michael was born in Toronto to two Irish parents, and this provides us with a unique insight into the identity of a second-generation Irish Canadian. Michael is very honest about his perspective on his Irish identity, how that has changed throughout the years, from his childhood to the early 1990s, and his experiences studying Irish here at the University of St. Michael's College, right up to his current retirement plans. His future retirement plans, I should say. I would still encourage people to download the episodes and to share them with friends and family. Downloads are the easiest indicator for me to gauge how many people I am reaching with these conversations, so I would really appreciate it. I begin our chat by asking Michael about his Irish identity.
So, my parents emigrated in 1968. Both of them born in Dublin. Families from Dublin are around. I think my father's people were from Carlow. My mother's people were, I think, South Dublin, maybe down into Wicklow. I'm not sure. There's much of the story that is left unfinished. There wasn't a great deal of interest in talking about it. They'd answer if they were pressed. It wasn't like they were hiding things, but there was a disinclination, and you'd have to ask targeted questions. And as a kid, you're not minded to ask targeted questions, really. They come to you a bit more as you get older, as you have experiences of your own, as you travel back to Ireland, as each of us did in my family. I'm the eldest of four. And so you kind of tease it out of them in bits. And, the one of the hardest things of having them gone, both of them passed away more than 10 years ago now, is that there's no one to ask for many of these questions.
Do you regret not asking the questions?
Of course, yeah. Of course. And it's not like there was plenty of questions left unasked, but the longer you live, the more that will arise and come up to you. And so, one of the biggest questions is, why did you emigrate? Because both of them were firmly middle class. They had established careers. My father in particular was an electrician. He had a shop in Kevin Street. He was the eldest of seven boys. The eldest of seven, yeah. Firmly middle class household. Not rich, but enough money to, pay for school and to pay for a decent house and a social life. And between 1967 and 1968, they all came. The parents, being my grandparents, all seven boys, the ones who were married with their wives, the ones who'd already had children with little babies, and the whole crew came, lock, stock, and barrel.
Wow. To Toronto?
To Toronto, yes.
How do you convince that many people that this is the best
So there's one of the questions.
Idea for everyone?
There's one of the questions, right? So I know that, so my dad is also Michael, and he's the eldest of seven. Two of the middle boys, Peter and Philip, had come over. They both kind of early on had good jobs. Philip worked for Ericsson, the Swedish telecommunications firm. And anyway, for their work, they had been over to North America. For sure, they'd been to New York, probably Boston or Baltimore or Chicago, and they went to Montreal. And they went to Montreal during Expo '67. And for as good or as stable and decent as their life was back home in Dundrum, they came back and they said, "Listen, wow, you have to see what's going on. The opportunity, the ambition, the forward-looking, the girls in miniskirts. This is where it's all happening. You have to come over and see it." And it was years later that we discovered possibly what was also another reason, and I don't know this for absolute sure, but the second eldest boy, Jim, who's still alive, he's the only one of the seven who's still with us, and he's 92 now, I believe. But he was in the seminary to become a priest. And Jim was always a quiet man, academic man, loved reading, loved books, loved theology, and would talk about theology. But he was quiet. Just by nature, he was a quiet kind of a man. He was reserved. He had a bit of a stammer. Just a quiet kind of a fellow. And I'm told, although I don't know this, it hasn't been verified, and now with many of that generation gone, we don't know all of the details, but I'm told that the bishop came around to the house one day and said, "I'm sorry, I don't think we can use this man. Can't use him. He's too gentle, he's too mild, and we need stronger men. We need men," I presume now I'm filling this in, but we need men who can stand up and pound the pulpit and put the fear of God into people and tell them how to vote and tell them, who to support and what causes they ought not go near. And so, there's no future for him here. And so around the same time, I think, there were some of the brothers who had come back from Canada, and they said, "Listen, they're screaming for priests over there. They, vocations are in need. And so if, no promises, but if you come over, I think there's a good chance." And so I think that was a big part of their motivation. That
And did he become a priest?
He did, yeah. He became a diocesan priest in 1982, and he lived all his life as a diocesan priest, including up in St. Column Kills, which is in Orillia. And he's retired now. He's at St. Bernard's home for retired diocesan priests up on Finch.
He might be the first person I've ever heard who, essentially his reason for emigrating was to become a priest here, as opposed to, being a priest in Ireland. And it's unusual. I'm sure there are other examples. I just have never heard of someone like that.
Yeah, but I mean, it goes hand in hand with what we know. I wasn't alive at the time, but the church in Ireland in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s was very conservative. And listen, by any measure, my Uncle Jim, Father Jim, he's a conservative man and a conservative priest. He would not be a liberal by almost any definition. But that wasn't enough. They needed him to to have that kind of animus, that kind of fervor.
Yeah. A lot of people come on the podcast and they talk about coming to Canada because they want a little bit more of a liberal life compared to the conservative life they might have had in Ireland. But it's interesting to hear that even a priest is looking for a more liberal life than the life.
And the family too were willing enough to come. My dad gave up what I understand to be a good electrical business. And so this is one of the questions. And so perhaps one of the things about being Irish in Canada, being a first generation, is that there are some of these unanswered questions. Because my mom and dad were here, and I could ask them these questions. People tell their own stories, and they don't always give you. They don't say, I was in trouble with the law, or, I was deeply in debt. And I don't think that any of those things were true. But people tell their own stories.
And believe them.
Yeah, and they do. They inhabit them, and then they believe them kind of going forward. So, but it's a crazy question. Yeah. Why do you pick up your whole family, your life, your social connections, your career, your business? All the. My dad had a running career. He ran for Crusaders, and he was quite successful. He was the All Ireland Marathon champion in 1961.
Wow.
Missed out on the Olympics because the qualification was like in a couple of years after that. One of his big regrets was
tough on the Olympics, isn't it? You can peak at the wrong time or the right
time.
Oh
yeah, he peaked like
early,
a couple
or late,
a year or two too early.
Yeah.
A year or two too early. So, but to leave all of that behind. And start a new life. It's a fantastic thing. It's a crazy.
It's almost decision. Like the more modern stories. A lot of people who emigrate now do so for adventure and not necessarily a better life, but a different life. Whereas people in the 60s generally was for a better life. It's interesting to hear that it sounds like they had a fine life at home, and they just, apart from the two Peter and Philip who were talking about the women in the miniskirts in Montreal, that they weren't. It wasn't for adventure as such. It was more, something different.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm filling it in here now, right? And we all have been, but there's 28 cousins between all the 7 brothers, and that's not even having one, not including the priest. Yeah. So we talk about that a lot in and among the family, and the overwhelming thing that comes through is that life was very closed. things were very closed certainly in the 1950s. And then did it loosen up all that much in the 60s? It did a bit, but maybe not all that much. And the opportunity for a more expansive life, for travel beyond what you would normally travel, for experiences, for diversity, for, pubs and shops that were open when you wanted them to be open instead of, the times that were preordained. I think having that more expansive life, the more opportunities, because again, it wasn't out of dire, financial need, but perhaps they also saw limitations on what they could do and what they could earn and who they could be and the types of experiences they could have.
What was it like as a child growing up with a second?
Well, then they got poorer because they came over here and they all. Well, no. I mean, there was various levels of success, but money was tight, and then was I think the 70s were good, and then the 80s came, and the 80s were really tight, and so there was no trips back to Ireland. We went for the first time in the mid 80s, and so that's
be tough for them when they're it's their home place and it's where they're. I couldn't imagine, like, if you just told me I would struggle if I wasn't able to go home on a relatively regular basis, but we're spoiled nowadays. But yeah.
And so that's, I mean, to me, and I certainly feel I'm an Irish Canadian person, but I'm not an Irish person. I did live there once for one summer, but for the most part, I don't come from there. I have a great affinity for there. I have a great connection to there. So many touchstones and hallmarks and people and places and personalities that I feel an affinity for, a connection to. But I'm not from there. Yeah. It seems to me that it's a lot less final now. When my mom and dad came, it was like, pack all the stuff, put it on the ship. I don't know why they took a ship. They took a ship. There was planes available, but they took a ship. And that's it. You're moving and you're not coming back. And you might come back for a wedding or a funeral, but again, you might not. And there's plenty of them that they missed. So there's a finality to it, which I think, in this generation, even the previous waves of Irish immigrants, it's just not as final. You can try your luck here. You can see if you like it.
Yeah, that's true. Try your luck. I don't think people tried their luck back then. You're right. All hands were on deck. We were, as you said, bringing everything, the kitchen sink, the whole lot with us, and you had to make it work. There was no second choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I think, coming here now, there is a sense of, especially the 2-year visa. So you create this amount of time, this arbitrary time of, I'll see what it's like for 2 years, and if I like it, I'll try and get PR. If I don't like it, I'll just go home, and it's very just relaxed. Yeah.
I mean, the Wolf Tones predicted it in 1980, 87. They said the big airplanes go both ways, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's when we see better days, if you do and you have a bit of money, you can go back.
Yeah.
And maybe you didn't like it here, or maybe you didn't meet somebody, or the opposite. Maybe you did meet someone here and you'll stay here, or you've had success in your career, your personal life.
Yeah. What being so you say you're Irish Canadian. What's that like for someone growing up in Toronto? You're not the first Irish Canadian we've had in the show, or the first second generation.
There's a parade of them.
No, there's not too many. Like most people I interview are born in Ireland, raised in Ireland, and moved here at some stage as an adult. The previous guest on the show moved here at the age of 75, I think. So different, but most people in their 20s and 30s are people I interview who move here. Whether they've stayed or for a long time or a short time, but you are in the minority of people who I've interviewed who, are born here, but both parents are from Irish, and that creates a different dynamic for your identity. Growing up in Canada, that we talk about how multicultural Canada is and all that type of thing, but I don't know, how did you feel growing up? Did you feel Canadian or Irish or both? Was it even relevant?
It changes over time. There's a desire to fit in, of course. And that actually operates both on not just on the kids, but on the parents as well.
Yeah.
Like, my parents did not immerse us in Irish culture. Around the house, there was the music. The food was prepared the same as my mom would have prepared it back home. All the touchstones were there, but we weren't immersed in it. And anyway, it wasn't really there to be immersed in either. So there was no Gaelic sports available, or if there was, we didn't know about them. It's not like we were put in, Irish language school or, Sunday school, or there was dancing available, but, my brothers and I were kind of at the front of the family, so there was no Irish dancing for us, So we weren't immersed in it, but, neither were the parents. They got into, my dad got into hockey, he became a big hockey fan.
Yeah.
They got involved in their community. And so kind of the model of life looked a bit the same, like members of the parish, the school attached to the parish, they'd be involved in the parish, they'd be involved in the school, they'd be involved in the community around. That model of life, I think, would have been the same back home or here in their new country. But the other things that surrounded it were Canadian, right? Yeah. And I felt a Canadian kid. I knew what my roots were and I knew what my background was. And, I knew when I heard an Irish person speak, I know where they're from. I hear that accent. It's the same, it's almost like the first imprint that you have, that language, right? The particular cadence, the particular turns of phrase, come here to me and, give over. Things that other parents didn't say. Yeah. Other parents weren't saying, when I grow up, there's to be no Andrew Martins here. I still don't actually know what Andrew Martins is. You ever heard of that?
Not really, no.
Andrew Martins is like horseplay or, mucking around.
Okay.
But that was a big thing. No Andrew Martins.
Yeah.
For a while we thought it was a person.
Sounds like a person.
I don't know Andrew, and I won't have him in. If he comes around, we'll not answer the door. But those kinds of turns of phrase, that there was such an affinity, there was such a connection with those, or such a resonance. All of us, we knew where we were from, and then parents never forced anything upon us. We just kind of came to it naturally, and each of us, so I'm the eldest of four, as I said, each of us have, taken trips back and have our own set of connections.
What's your connection like now, out of curiosity?
I'd say it's a very strong affinity. I mean, I'm 52. I'd like to retire there. I think I know where I want to retire.
Specifically where?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, because then you'll compete with me for the housing. So
fair enough. Get me off there.
Somewhere in Wicklow.
Lovely.
Somewhere in Wicklow.
Lovely.
I think. But, I still go back. I was back as recently as a couple of months ago with my brothers. We went to see Christy Moore. So, we still listen to many of the old singers and the old music. And, myself and my brother both have our boys in Toronto Michael Davids. So, they play hurling and they play football. The connections are thorough.
Yeah.
When Ireland are playing in the World Cup, we watch that. When there's an election, we pay attention. Yeah. It's all of those things. It's a basis. It's an identity.
Yeah, definitely. That's a nice turn of phrase. It's a base. It's an identity. The idea, because at the end of the day, you weren't born there, as you said. So it is.
I'm not from there. I'm really not.
But to have that interesting one to say, I wonder what if I had a child here, I'd like to think that he or she, in 52 years' time, would be watching Ireland in the World Cup, or I wonder what's going on in the politics over there. Just having that interest, and then the idea that you're actually thinking about retiring there is interesting. Is there a particular? Is that you've obviously been to the place? Is it a sentimental thing, familiar wise, or is it just you just fell in love with that particular area?
It's sentimental, for sure. There's no family in that particular area. We still do have family there, but not quite there. I love the landscape of Wicklow, and I love the feeling of it. I love the pace. I love the weather, which is funny enough to say, but it's more of an ethos. It's a feeling when you're there. Listen, I've made a fine life here, and I'm a Canadian guy, but I'd like to see myself retiring in something that's a little bit less frenetic, less crazy, where the pace is a bit slower, where priorities are perhaps a bit different.
Interesting, yeah, because you're born and raised in Toronto, in a city.
Yes.
And I suppose I can't ask you to contrast that with another experience, because I don't think you've ever lived in a difference? Have you ever lived anywhere that's not a city?
No, I mean Kingston for law school.
Yes,
But that's is that a city? It is, in many ways.
Yeah, a lot smaller than Toronto.
Yeah, but no, not in the country.
Yeah.
If you use that.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just kind of I get what you mean by the the frenetic lifestyle, the non-stop, and like you can. It's there's ways of slowing it down, of course, but it is hard, and sometimes it just I think there's studies show that we all walk faster in the city, even if we're not in a rush.
Yeah,
we just walk faster.
Yeah.
I dispute that. I think I'm actually quite a slow walker, but I think there is people just do. They look like they're going somewhere with purpose around the city, and it's hard to be that relaxed way of life and whatever. But is that something that you think you would obviously like?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, walking.
That might be your profession.
Walking along of course it's that. Of course it's that too. I mean, the practice of law is famously non-stop, right? You're at it all the time. You're available all the time. So for when that time comes, and I'm not there yet, but when that time comes, that's the idea.
Interesting.
Wander among the Wicklow Hills.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you. One of the most beautiful places to be. I'm not surprised. And the weather is better on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast, to be fair.
I mean, I've loved time in Clare is one of the most beautiful places in the country. And I've loved time in Clare, and I've loved time in Kerry and in Galway. Yeah. And my father and his family used to have a country home, I guess, although I suppose they would have rented it. I don't think they owned a country home for themselves. So maybe they swapped it with somebody. Who knows? Another detail that's lost in the sands of time, but it was in Salt Hill. And so they'd go out to that part of the country every year for the summer and just kind of, play. So maybe that's where I get it from.
It's so interesting, the lack of what's not said. Like, it mustn't have belonged to them because none of you own it now.
Sure, yeah.
So someone owned it and you've no idea who it is?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And there's no one to ask. There's no one to ask.
No one to ask.
Actually, it's funny. I was recounting this the other day. It's a bit of a sad story, but I'll tell you because it was 1984 and we were over there, and it was kind of our first big family trip. It was the first time I or any of the other kids had been back to Ireland.
You were 12 at this stage?
I would have been 12, yeah. And so my third youngest sibling, Declan, would have been I guess about 3 at the time, and so I was 12, and so I've got a decent memory of it, but it's far from a complete memory, right? Like it's not. There's gaps and there's holes, and you're not that aware at 12 of the world around you or really other people. You're kind of very very self-contained, and so I remember being at a beach, but it wasn't an ocean. It wasn't a beach on the sea. It would have been I suppose one of the locks somewhere. And we were down in Tip, and we were visiting my mother's brother there. So I think maybe it was Loch Derg. I don't know. Yeah. And there are some beachy areas, right? So, and it was a populated beach. Like there was a lot of people out there on towels and blankets and having a picnic or whatever. And at some point, we lost Declan. He was gone. He'd wandered off. And my mum was with my sister, who would have been only a year old at the time. And so she was kind of on the baby. And so it was my dad's job to look out for the boys. And so he was instantly in enormous trouble. And it was serious. I don't mean to make light of it because we'd lost, the 3-year-old who'd wandered away somewhere. I'm sorry, he was a bit older. I think he would have been 4. But in any event, he was off wandering somewhere. And so I remember this with crystal clarity, right? I mean, there's a mad rush, and I was asked to run around and, search for him, and there was some yelling, and I suppose they would have spoken to the authorities, but were there any authorities on a beach on Loch Derg? I don't know, but there may well have been nobody. Anyway, so in my mind's eye, I want to say it was about an hour. And of course, this was a very frantic hour, right? Like, did he go into the water? Is he floating around somewhere? Did he walk off a cliff? Is he, there's all kinds of terrible things that can happen when a little kid goes missing. I mean, they found him. And all was well, and that's kind of the end of the story from my recollection of it. And we were talking about this a couple of Christmases ago, myself and my brothers, including Declan, who had been lost. And there's no one to ask. There's no one at all to ask because
you're the oldest.
I was the oldest. I'm the only one who has any recollection. So my next brother Patrick doesn't remember it. Yeah. He would have been 8. He doesn't remember it. Declan has no memory at all. Marianne, the baby, she doesn't, obviously have any idea. My parents are gone. But would they have told anyone? Would they have told anyone, like maybe when my mom got back and saw her, her brother or any of the family there, would they have told anyone that they lost a child?
Probably not.
No, they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So there's literally nobody to ask about this.
Yeah.
And it's one of these incidents that, stands out very large in my memory.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus, you lose a sibling, it was an hour of panic, and my mother was just ragged with, with emotion over it. And, of course, all ended well.
Yeah.
We got back Declan, or some other kid who we then called Declan. Who knows?
Yeah.
And there's no one to ask about it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That is sad. It's important to talk to people while they're alive.
Yeah.
And I used to like oral histories and things like that. Even someone said this to me about the podcast, that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they asked me what I was going to do with the podcast. Are you going to do an academic study? I said no, because that's not the purpose of the podcast. And they said, it's like an oral history project. And I was like, it kind of is. I'd never thought about that.
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
That was not the intention behind it at all. But when you collect 80 or 90 people's...
Is that what you're on now?
No, I think you might be 70.
Okay.
I think you're 70.
Okay.
But it will be, there's a backlog of people. It's an oral history project about these different stories. And it's great, because it's like I think it's important. I think it's something that, and to hear from different aspects. I'm glad to meet someone who's born in Toronto with Irish parents and to see what that was like, basically. And now you have children, and you spoke about is it son or son's? Son.
Yeah, Ronan, one son.
St. Michael Davids,
yes,
which is the GA club on the kind of west side of the city here. And then the reason we met is because your daughter submitted a project for the Irish Heritage Awards.
That's Madeleine.
That won the award.
Yes.
You're very proud of her.
I am.
Which is linked more with history. So you've one daughter focusing on Irish history and Irish heritage for this particular award, and you've a son playing sports. How does that make you feel as a Irish Canadian?
Yeah, and Neve, the eldest, is does many of the same things, and I mean, I absolutely want them to carry it forward. This is who they are, and this is part of their identity. And by their age, I'd been back to Ireland once. When it was me. For them, they've each been 3, 4, 5 times, and we're about to go in 3 weeks again.
Excellent.
So, I wanted to be part of their background. I want them to have an identity. I suppose it doesn't have to be this one, but this is the one we got. Yeah. So it's the one we're going to have.
Yeah, fair enough. Apart from looking at properties in Wicklow when you go there, what do you get up to when you go there?
Well, I'm a big fan of Irish history as well, and I love to read and to discover more. So I love to explore areas of the country, areas of Dublin, to go back to some of the neighborhoods that the parents used to live in, some of the places they used to go, and then some of the places I used to go. It's now, 27 years since the summer I worked there in Fitzsimons and Temple Bar, and, to kind of go back and see even within my lifetime, the changes that have happened. And, Temple Bar is terrible now. It was great at the time. I don't think that's probably true, but my visceral feeling is that it was great in '98, and now it's all gone to hell. But it was probably always a bit like that. But I'd love to go see the football and just travel around the country. It's and see the people who are there. I have a couple cousins, more than a couple, but scattered around. 2 summers ago, we did a Shannon cruise, and weathered the high waters. I
thought about doing that, but I never did it. Was it an enjoyable experience?
It was great. It rained every day of it.
That's good.
It was the one summer, I think it was 23. So it was the summer that the river was really, really high, and a lot of the moorings were washed out, and so there'd be nowhere to tie up a lot of the time. And when the rain came, it was even more difficult to park those big boats. And my wife quit. She was the captain. She was meant to be the captain because she was a sailor in her younger years, and she quit. It was a reverse mutiny. A mutiny is when the captain, gets forced out. This is where she quit on her own, and the sailors wanted her to stay. But no. So there's lots of things like that. Yeah. And I enjoy being there.
Good. Yeah. It's very simple. You enjoy being there. And yes. A couple last questions. Your family, the 7, your brother's siblings, the 7 of them that came, you said they all came with their partners, and the ones that had partners, and one became a priest. what's their relationship like with Ireland? And I'm not asking, like, there's no right or wrong answer. There was a part of me a couple of years ago. It's funny, Irish people are funny. Like they want to meet Americans or Canadians who don't show off that they're Irish, who don't tell them that they're Irish, and then they also at the same time want them to be proud of their Irish ancestry if they are going to recognise it. So are there people who are a little bit ambivalent or indifferent or really into it, not into it? Has it been a different experience for all of those 28 first cousins, I suppose?
Yes, I'd say it is different for all of them, but everyone goes through a kind of an arc, where you're, it's less important to you, and then when it's more important. Of those cousins, I'd say easily 3/4 of them have gone in some iteration back to Ireland to travel around and to see their roots and to explore those connections. So it's somewhere for all of them, but for my father and his brothers, the connection was still very strong all through their lives, and the ones that ended up in Texas were Texas Irish, right? And the ones in New York, New Jersey were New York, New Jersey Irish, and that's kind of carried forward. And indeed, my mother's family, one branch of it went to London and lived in Luton. And so they were the Luton Irish, and they went to the Luton Irish Club. And it's, in my experience, it's a bit easier and more available to be that in the away place, to have that connection backwards. But it's not, it's a bit flimsy too, because you're not Irish anymore. Of course you are, but you're not from there anymore. And when the connection is severed, you're losing something, and you're losing something with every day and month and year that goes by. And so I used to notice when my dad and mom went back to Ireland, they weren't Irish anymore. Of course they were, but they weren't. They were Canadian now. And their friends and family would point out the differences in their accent and how they said things differently. And they don't say steps anymore, they say stairs. A very North American thing, and just little things like this. And you almost end up being between the benches. Yeah. And that was the feeling for my dad and for his brothers. They were, in Canada or in the US, they were Irish people. And they made a big play of it. Not grandstanding or anything, none of them wearing the big green plastic hats or anything, but they were very identifiably Irish people. But when they went back home, they were Americans now. And almost always Americans, despite being from Canada. Even the ones that were from Canada were still Americans, So a little bit between the benches, which is a bit odd, at least, and a bit sad in a way too. You're kind of a man or a person without a home. You're a bit, you're between the two things. But it's not a sentence. It's not a hard assignment. It's a great. It has enriched my life, my brothers, my sister, my cousins, my kids. My wife, and she has family that from Clare and from Cork, going way back now. 4 or 5 generations back, maybe famine or famine adjacent. And so that's the tapestry of who we are. And so as an Irish Canadian, as a first generation Irish Canadian, that connection is very strong. It's visceral. You feel it. You feel it when you go back and you're driving the roads and you're seeing the script on the road signs and you're hearing the cadence of people speaking. That's your tribe. That's your people. And having that connection is a lifelong enrichment. It really is. No matter when you discover it. I kind of discovered it in early 90s.
Interesting.
Early 90s when, I would have been around 18 or so. Yeah. And, U2 had been around for a while. Everyone knew they were Irish, but around that time, Sinead O'Connor was out and the Pogues were out. The movie The Commitments came out. Yeah. And Ireland in the 1990 World Cup. Yeah. Going through against Romania and then finally getting beaten by Italy in the quarterfinals. You suddenly began to pay more attention, take more of an interest. Certainly we did. I met my great friend Tim O'Leary around a little before that time, but we kind of got into the music together and got into the history together. Started reading about the Easter Rising and the Civil War and the heroes and all the old stories. And so maybe everyone comes, at a certain point, and whatever is proximate to them then becomes the gateway, becomes the impetus for learning more. But that was our impetus, and it just kind of continued from there. We were talking there about the early 90s and turning 18 and whatever, and forming those connections. And of course that was around the time that I went to university, and I went here to U of T and St. Michael's College. And the community here, I have to say, played a big role in forming that connection or furthering that connection, because for obscure reasons, my buddy Tim and I decided to take Introduction to the Irish Language, possibly without knowing exactly what it entailed. And, it was tough, but it resonated for us, both of us. And, learning from Maureen Yarmada and seeing all the cognates too, right? Like the reason why the word galore means what it means, things like that, those connect, that just enriched it further. And then, things like taking Irish history in third year with David Wilson, who just, what a fabulous teacher. He also appeared to be a madman during those classes, with only appeared. He hides it well. Bringing the tin whistle to class, and some of his stories and tales were just fabulous. And then, there's a real Irish community, of course, centered around Celtic Studies Department, but not only. And we did debating, Tim and I and others too. And we went off to Dublin for the 1991 World Championships, and we didn't qualify. We were first years at the time, but we still got some financial support. And we went again to Cork in 1995, and those kinds of things just it was like brick on brick on brick. The connections kind of piled up. We formed the Irish Club when we were here at St. Mike's, which was not terribly long lasting, probably because its programmatic offerings were very narrow indeed. But this place was really a big part of forming and furthering that kind of connection, and it still is.
I'm delighted to hear that. Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that, because I hope, I would love to meet a student in 10 or 20 or 30 years time that says that their experience at St. Mike's helped them re-engage or engage initially with their Irish background. So
although I'll tell you this, on the day that we did our final exam for first year Irish, Introduction to Irish Language, we walked out, and I still remember the exam was somewhere on St. George there, and Tim and I walked out, and we, from the dark exam hall into the bright sunshine, we just looked at each other and we said, that's the most Irish we're ever going to know for the balance of our lives. And it's turned out to be true.
Really hope you enjoyed that chat with Michael. I want to thank him for his honesty, and I look forward to more chats with him in the future. Once again, all feedback is welcome. You can email me. My email address is in the description of the podcast, or you can find me on social media. It's always lovely getting messages from strangers and talking about the podcast and their stories of what brought them to Toronto. I would still encourage people to download the episodes and to share them with friends and family. Downloads are the easiest indicator for me to gauge how many people I'm reaching with these conversations, so I would really appreciate it. Thanks to Natalie Barbuzzi, who provided the logo for the podcast, and thanks to Shannon Heaton, who provided the music you are now listening to. You'll find all of her music on Spotify. There'll be another episode of Irish in Toronto in 2 weeks, and until then, slán go fóill.